Dr. Driven, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I want to turn for a moment to consideration of some of the things said in the Vidal-Anderson report, and specifically through the lens of historical lens. And the questions have to do with how Robin Bodway and Michael Smart, two economists that Ontario is going to be having testify, how they deal with his comments. And it's at tab 6 of the compendium. You will find the portion of their report entitled "The Value of the Augmentation Promise in the Robinson Treaties." And I've excerpted pages 30 through 32 of their report, which is found at 61 to 63 of the compendium. I wonder if you have that in front of you.
I do, thank you.
Now, I'm bringing these parts of the report to your attention because of a specific reference they make over on compendium page 62 under a heading that they call the Vidal-Anderson proposal. You see that there?
I do.
So they, at paragraph 92, they have a partial quote about Vidal from the Vidal-Anderson report, and they quote from the 1849 report: "The only alternative would appear to be investment of the proceeds of sales, ... They've left out some text in the funds, and the application of the annual interest of the sum to the general benefit of all Indians occupying it." Now, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go back to the Vidal-Anderson report specifically. Now, what these two economists are saying is that what Vidal and Anderson were talking about was how to invest the annuity payments. And so I want to take you back first to tab 3, which is the Vidal-Anderson report. And if you go to compendium page 25, you will see the full quote, starting with "should it be deemed inexpedient."
Yes.
So I'm going to read that for you and read it for the court. So
Thank
it's a page.
Do I have it? Is it page 66 at the bottom?
Oh, no, it's
No.
page 25 of the compendium. We're now looking at the original transcription, I take it, of the Vidal-Anderson report.
In tab 3. Got
In
it.
tab 3 of the compendium at
Got it.
page 25 on the bottom right-hand side. And it tracks the partial quote that Bodway and Smart use. And so the full quote is: "Should it be deemed inexpedient or found impractical to obtain the surrender of the whole territory, the only alternative would appear to be the investment of the proceeds of sales of such position or of such portions of it as are or may be required for mining purposes, comma, in the funds, comma, and the application of an annual interest of the sum to the general benefit of all the Indians occupying it." And the paragraph goes on to say how it would be divided, not regulating the distribution by where the mineral disposition is. But that's the quote that Bodway and Smart reference at page 62.
I understand that.
So after that long introduction, the question: are Vidal and Anderson at the quote, what are they talking about? Annuities?
No, they're talking about, it's right in the first sentence. It says of the quote, "Should it be deemed inexpedient or found impractical to obtain the surrender of the whole territory." What they're saying is, if we cannot arrive at a treaty, this is what we suggest.
Now, based on your knowledge as a historian, Was this a common way of dealing with unsurrendered sales of parcels or?
Well, it was a way of dealing with parcels that were being sold off, basically, of reserves, of existing reserves.
So what would happen with the sale of existing reserves?
The money would come in and would be put in a trust fund, a band fund.
Okay, and that band fund, now Bodway and Smart say the reference to in the funds, they say that in the funds, let me just see. Sorry, just lost my page. They say in the funds is a 19th century term meaning government bonds. This is at their footnote 49. What, do you have anything to say about that?
No, that's beyond my knowledge.
Could I ask, just go back a little bit, Mr. Schachter? I think the way you put the question was, or, well, first I'll go to the answer, your answer, Dr. Driven.
Yes.
The answer to the question was, are Vidal and Anderson talking about the annuities? And your answer was no. They say if we can't arrive at a treaty, this is what we suggest.
Yes.
This being,
If we cannot purchase the entire territory, maybe we can purchase parts of the
Parts of it,
territory,
okay.
individual plots of it. And then what they would do is if there were some enterprise, say for instance, a mine on it,
Mhm.
then they would take that money, they would invest it in some form, and then the interest on that would go to the entire group of people in the ceded territory.
bands.
The bands as a whole.
Right, so that's your reference to, that was the way that they dealt with existing reserves. They sold them, or they sold parcels from, if they had a deal, they sold parcels from or lots from those reserves and then returned to them the interest on the invested proceeds.
Yes, that's my understanding, Your Honor.
Okay, but they weren't suggesting, when you say, if we can't arrive at a treaty, this is what we suggest, they weren't suggesting that there were yet reserves on this
No,
territory.
No, they weren't
Okay.
suggesting that.
Okay, I'm just going to catch up.
And I mean, we went. Yeah,
It's a great whisper. Okay,
it should come as no surprise in phase one. This is all detailed in the Bagot Commission report about how they would deal with.
I'm recalling that. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Now, the second thing that Bodway and Smart talk about in their report that I want to have your views on is their treatment of a document or a petition that they found from one of Shinglekons's sons from 1864.
Yes.
And at page 63 of the compendium, and this is from Bodway and Smart's report, they make the comment that the Vidal-Anderson approach also formed the understanding of the Anishinaabe. Now, it'll be for, I guess, the judge to decide about what that, if there is such an approach, but these authors are saying that there was an approach, and they say it was formed part of the understanding of the Anishinaabe leaders about the augmentation, what the augmentation promise meant. In an 1864 speech to government officials at Garden River, Chief Buhkwujjene, whose name I apologize, I could never pronounce properly, and I'd only be butchering it, objected to the treatment of the Anishinaabe under the treaties stating, Mr. Robinson promised us that the land should be surveyed and sold, and that at the end of 1 year, we and each member of our people should receive $4 in cash, and that the rest of the money should be invested at interest for our benefit. Now, I appreciate, and I'm sure everyone here appreciates that that clause is consistent with the stage 1 interpretation that the court provided. But I want to focus on the underlined portion. I think as do Bodway and Smart, they're using this quote to establish in their, or to as proof, they say, that the Anishinaabe believe there was a promise that Canada would invest at interest for their benefit. So first question, this is a Garden River chief.
Yes,
That's a Robinson Huron chief.
that's correct.
And I want to turn up to the actual document before we look at, ask the questions about it. So that can be found at, excuse me, at tab 7, I believe.
Excuse me.
And I've only excerpted part of a part of the reports of the inspectors of the free ports of Gaspé and Sault Ste. Marie, which is actually now Exhibit 17 in Phase 3. And you'll see over at the bottom of page 67 of the compendium, the author writes, my last visit to Garden River, this is the second last paragraph. My last visit to Garden River was with Mr. Wilson, who was sent down by the Indian Department in order to get the consent of the Indians to the surrender of 2 copper locations on the reserve of 400 acres each, applied for by Mr. Keating as representing an American company. I'm going to stop there. Do you know which Mr. Keating we're talking about?
This is Mr. Keating, who I believe this is the Mr. Keating who acted as one of the translators at the 1850 treaty negotiations in the Sioux.
Okay. It continues on, who are going to open up the mines and work them. Next paragraph, the council assembled in due Indian form on the bank of Garden River, and Mr. Wilson, through an interpreter, explained to them the object of his visit and what he asked for when, after a good deal of consultation and gesticulating, the senior chief present, Pequachinini, made a PE-QU-CHIN-INIC, made a speech and declined to surrender the locations, thus, for a time, at all events, retarding the progress of that part of the district. And again, here we're talking about the Huron district, right?
Yes, we are.
The 2 chiefs present, Pequachinini and Nebinagoching.
Yes,
And Nebinagoching was one of the leading chiefs at the RHT negotiations.
that's correct. He's also one of Shingwa Khan's sons.
Okay. Requested the interpreter to say to me that they wished to communicate the contents of the former speech to the government. I promised that I would, and the speech, almost word for word, will be found in the appendix.
Yes. So
and then if you turn over the next page at page 68 in the compendium, which is it appears at page 49 of the reports, you have the full speech of as recorded, the speech of Pequachinini at Garden River. And you see in the first paragraph, they say, Mr. Robinson was sent up to us by the governor. We made a treaty with him. I'm reading from the middle of the first paragraph of the speech. We made a treaty with him, and surrendered a large portion of our lands. Mr. Robinson promised us that his land should be surveyed and sold. And at the end of 1 year, we and each member of our people should receive $4 in cash, and that the rest of the money should be invested at interest for our benefit. So far, the land has not been surveyed, and we have never received the $4 each promised to us by Mr. Robinson, only receiving the $1 a year each as our annuity. And then in the next paragraph, in the middle, the speech continues with the line started, money divided. The first full sentence of that, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Eight lines down. We believed Mr. Pennyfather and surrendered more of our land, but not one of his promises have been carried out to this day. And when we heard of your arrival here this morning, we were glad and thought that you brought us the money, instead of which you want more of our land, although not one of Mr. Robinson's nor Mr. Pennyfather's promises have been kept. So it appears that the Huron chief is complaining that promises under the treaty have not been kept.
That's what he's complaining about, yes.
But what I want to direct your focus in on is to whether there was a treaty promise to invest money, or what is the nature of the actual treaty promise in relation to the annuity.
The treaty promise in relation to the annuity is about prospective advantages. It's not about investment. There's nothing in the treaty about investment.
Okay, and you talk about not being investing in the treaty. I know the words aren't in there. What about the Robinson Superior? Was there any difference between the Hurons and the Superiors that provides any guidance to the court in terms of the interpretation?
Well, I don't think that the term interest had any meaning in the economic lexicon of the Anishinaabe of Lake Superior that when the treaty was made, certainly, and for years after, because they did not have an economy that operated on the basis of money. Instead, their economy operated on the basis of gift giving or presents. So that interest was, like I say, it's not part of their economic lexicon. They have other terms to use when they speak of gifts. That's where their embellishment of terms comes in.
But let's go with the hypothetical that Pequachini is going with, is that there's a surplus that the Great Father has. And so what's the treaty promise in respect of the surplus, if there is any?
Well, the treaty promises is to use whatever surplus there is for the best interests of the Lake Superior Anishinaabe as a father would act in accord with his children. That's the treaty promise as the Anishinaabe understood it.
So earlier today, you said it was to use it for the greatest possible advantage, quoting Vidal and Anderson.
Yes.
Is there any difference in that you put between greatest possible advantage and the best interest?
Well, from the Lake Superior point of view, I would say no, that's not a relevant consideration. What's relevant is that if there's a surplus, that surplus will be used for the betterment of the band so that they can reestablish their culture, as I said before, revitalize their culture.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that you're, I'm going to try again.
Okay, sorry.
I'm not sure that you're, I'm talking about if there is a surplus.
Yes.
If you don't need to spend it right away, what does your great father do with the money?
Oh, he would take the money and use it to the best interests of the children. That might be investment, but it might be building a hospital. It might be building a school. It could be whatever is necessary to improve the lives of the Anishinaabe. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That could be a financial investment as one tool, but it could be other things as well.
And how would the Great Father determine what to do with the surplus?
Well, at the beginning, the Great Father would be responsible, as I was saying this morning, the Great Father, the Anishinaabe, felt that the Great Father would use whatever surplus there was to operate in their best interests.
Who would the Crown talk to, the Great Father talk to, in making decisions about what to do with the surplus?
They would talk to experts, experts in this, in whatever area it would be, if it were education or some other, or a financial vehicle, they would seek out information to find out whether that would be in the best interests of the Anishinaabe.
Would they consult the Anishinaabe?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. For sure, they would consult the Anishinaabe, because it's necessary for them to consult each other, because, as I said this morning, you have a living agreement here, and that living agreement requires the Anishinaabe and the Crown to interact with each other on a regular and recurrent basis. And certainly in that contact, in the regular and recurrent contact between them, this is a topic that would certainly come up, because it's relevant to the nature of the agreement between the parties.
From that, I don't have any more questions about your happiness report. So I'm going to turn then to your antiquity and demography report, page, exhibit 15. Now, just by way of context, the antiquity and demography report is required because once the Court of Appeal said that disparities in outcomes was relevant, one needs to know what the population is from time to time, and that's why we needed to start getting into demography and populations.
And I had a question before you started.
Oh, yes.
Is
Sorry.
there an issue? No, it's on this report.
Okay.
Is there any issue with respect to, I hesitate to use the word boundaries. Again, the first part of this report is about area, geographical area. Is that a issue in dispute, or is it just the population? And perhaps maybe it's in the report because it's setting the stage for the population.
No, it's just setting the stage for the population. The areas we're really concerned about for today is really one of the issues that I'm hoping is not an issue. But my friends, Ontario and Canada, have not confirmed it's an issue, is whether or not white sand and red rock existed in 1850. So I find myself in the odd position of, even though, and because Ontario and Canada have not agreed on how any award might be divided, if Ontario and Canada were to take the position that it should only be divided among the bands who existed in 1850, and then if they took the position that white sand and red rock didn't exist in 1850, my clients would be at a disadvantage. So I aim to prove through Dr. Dribbin that my clients existed. And the other important element that's common to all 12 Robinson Superior bands is the global populations.
Right. So is that not something that can be dealt with by, or can we not hear from Canada and Ontario to know if that is an issue in dispute?
Well, I've asked them, and I'm here. I mean, if we want to
Have
ask
they
them
told
again,
you, have they told, should I understand that
you should.
Canada and Ontario are taking a contrary position?
No, they have not said they're taking a contrary position. They just have not allowed me to advise the court that they've agreed.
Okay.
So I don't know what that means. Certainly, like taking no position will let you try and prove it. I don't know.
Well, I like the interpretation of Rule 1 of Civil Procedure that says we are to proceed in the most efficient way possible. And so if there is no dispute to whether white sand and red rock existed in 1850, I'd like to hear.
Your Honor, for Ontario, we are not disputing this point, but as we advised our friends, issues of population
Yes.
are really federal matters. So we've deferred to the federal crown on these issues, and we've indicated that in our responses to the requests to admit as well. So we're certainly not challenging the fact, but we're saying that these are matters within Canada's knowledge.
Okay, let's go back there. You do not challenge whether white sand and red rock existed in 1850.
We do not.
Thank you. Canada?
Unfortunately, in the absence of Miss Evans, Oh, absolutely. In the absence of Miss Evans, we're not prepared to consent to it. My understanding is that the disagreement is as to more of a numerical issue than so much pure existence. I will reach out.
Numerical as in population?
I will reach out to Miss Evans and see if I can get some instructions. on
Very
that
good.
point.
Thank you.
Okay, well, I
You're
do
not
understand.
necessarily further ahead.
Right, we're not necessarily further ahead, and it's not going to take me that much longer to take
All right.
Dr. Driven through it anyways. So, Dr. Driven, you opine in Exhibit 15, your Antiquity and Demography Report, that the Red Rock and White Sand First Nations were in existence prior to 1850, correct?
Yes, they were.
Can you just tell the court how it is you came to that conclusion?
Well, each of these banned territories, which I mean by that, the White Sand and the Red Rock banned territories, have or had trading posts in them. Trading posts were constructed in areas where Anishinaabe camped during the summer. Now, according to the oral history of both bands, to the people, the elders that I spoke to in both bands, they say that their bands have lived there since time immemorial. We know from ethnographic research that Anishinaabe bands tend to occupy a drainage basin. And what I did is I mapped the drainage basins, or had somebody map the drainage basins around Lake Nipigon.
Okay, I want to stop you there because I believe at tab 8 of the compendium are the various drainage basins, and perhaps it's at page 69 of the compendium. Perhaps it's map 2 in your report. And I believe that's what you were referencing.
Yes. Yes.
Just
I would
gonna wait
just
for the
go-
judge to get
Yeah,
there.
thank you.
All right, so you had someone map the drainage basins.
Yes. Now, when I took a look at other maps this map, I'd just like to comment on it for a moment. It shows the White Sand River drainage and Pictaguchi River drainage basin, and it shows the Nipigon River drainage basin. These are the two drainage basins associated with these two bands today. And
So-
back in time, mapped by other anthropologists back in time to the turn of the century.
Could you give me the, those two drainage basins that are still associated with the bands?
Well, let's do one band at a time.
Okay.
So for the White Sand First Nation on map 2 at page 69 of the compendium, which drainage basin would they reside in?
The White Sand Anishinaabe,
Yes.
they used and occupied the White Sand River and Pictaguchi River drainage basin at the north end of the lake, right, the center north of Lake Nipigon. That's where the White Sand band forages.
And on the map, it's sort of shaded black.
Yes, it is.
All right, and now let's talk about the Red Rock First Nation.
Yes. Now, the Red Rock First Nation is at the opposite end of Lake Nipigon on the Nipigon River. or around surrounding the Nipigon River. That's the drainage basin that they use and occupy.
And that's also in black at the bottom of the map.
That's correct.
All right.
Got it.
So you had someone map these, you talked about oral history.
Yeah.
So continue on explaining how you know they existed in 1850.
Well, when I mapped the White Sand land use area in the early 1990s, and I've also included that in my demography and then antiquity and demography report, there's a coincidence, or there's a goodness of fit between what I mapped in 1990, I think it was 91 or 92, and this particular, and these two drainage basins, especially the White Sand. There's some other elements that play here too. The Nipigon River was one of the best fishing spots in the world for speckled trout. In the world, the royal family came to fish even after this period in the 1900s. It was still a fabulous fishery. So it's hard to imagine people not living there when they have a fishery of that sort there. The same thing is true on the White Sand and Pictigouche River drainage basin. That's a drainage basin where the fish abound as well. In fact, all of Lake Nipigon was an area where fish were plentiful. So that, but especially in the Nipigon River area, and again in the north. And so that it stands to reason that the Anishinaabe would camp there in the summer, because that's where the food is. That's where they can get together and they can celebrate their existence. They can have ceremonies, they can get married, they can play lacrosse, they can do whatever they do in the summer to enjoy themselves. And the trading posts, if you look at the trading posts that were done by one of my colleagues who's since long passed away, Ken Dawson, he was an archaeologist, and what he did is he pointed out that when you look at fur trading posts around Lake Nipigon, you'll see that the White Sand River drainage basin and the Nipigon River drainage basin have trading posts going back well before 1850.
So what does having a trading post have to do with whether a people existed?
Because the trading post is built where the people are. They're not built and then the people come. The trading posts are built where the people are. So from that evidence and the oral history, I take it that these people have been in this area for as long as they can remember.
I hate to say this, but I'm experiencing a bit of a problem with my notes. So can we take a quick break? 5
Yes.
minutes?
I'm
Thank you.
sorry.
No, no. My problem. I'm going to stay here. We'll take a break. Thank you.
And you said for 5 minutes.
Can you help me, Chelsea? Just,
Drainage basins, and you talked about the two drainage basins. And you were explaining how you went to oral history, and you talked about the trading posts. And trading posts were put where the people are.
Yes,
And in your report, you come to the conclusion about the existence of white sand and red rock prior to 1850.
that's correct. Yes, I do.
Is there anything else further that the court needs to know about in terms of the existence of white sand and red rock?
so Nipigon is where Red Rock is, that drainage basin,
That's correct, Your Honor.
the mouth of the river, and the
So-
Pictigouche.
Pictigouche.
Pictigouche
Yes, Your Honor.
is where white sand is.
Yes, and
Excuse
the
me.
whole area, Your Honor, because it's a foraging area, so there's the drainage basin, but they operate throughout the whole drainage basin, and that is their ban territory.
Thank you.
And not surprising, I mean, you'll see, for example, in the left-hand side, there's Gull River. It wouldn't surprise me if that's probably Gull Bay.
Yes, and at one time was called Gull River.
The
I think
First
that may
Nation.
still be its official name.
Yes. So I want to go over then, please, to tab 9.
I would just like to mention one other
Oh, I
thing
apologize,
here.
yes.
Banned territories, to draw an analogy, are much like countries, small countries. And the existence of a country, say for instance, if Canada were a small country, it's a huge country, but the Canada being Canada itself depends on the people inside saying this is Canada, but it also depends on the people outside of Canada saying, yes, we acknowledge that you are Canada. If I had ever run across any information or any data through interviews or reading where I found a challenge to these two areas where some other band would say, no, that's my territory, then I would think twice, but that's never happened. The other Anishinaabe in that area acknowledge these areas as belonging to, or not belong to, but that the members of the White Sand Band are the recognized Anishinaabe proprietors of the White Sand and Pictagushi River drainage basin. And likewise, they acknowledge others, inside and outside, acknowledge that the Nipigon River drainage basin is the territory of the Red Rock Anishinaabe.
Okay. So thank you,
You're
Dr.
welcome.
Driven. So that brings us then to tab 9 of the compendium. Because now that we've, I hope, established that White Sand and Red Rock existed, we now have to deal with Canada's population tallies. And if you look at tab number 9, this is a reprinted from information provided by Canada, and at the top, on the margin on the left hand, not the top, if you turn it sideways, it's at the top, but it's the by the Surlocks binding. This is part of exhibit 1-0083, updated to November 2022 from source information, and exhibit 1-5023. And this was provided by Canada's Council, I believe, a couple of weeks ago. But you used a similar document to calculate, or in your report, you used a similar population report that was
Provided.
not all the way updated to November 2022.
That's correct.
And I want to take you to the column that's called Red Rock. And you'll see that this chart starts in 1872. Doesn't start in 1850. It starts in 1872.
Yes, I see that.
If you sort of intersect the very first row, 1872, it says total 1312. And then if you go over to the column that's Red Rock, AKA Lake Helen,
Yes,
you'll see that it's only in 1884 that a number of the bands, Pays Plat, BNA, Red Rock, AZA, it's only then that they start to get counted.
yes, that's correct.
Now, I don't think it's controversial that if they existed in 1884, they had more than a zero population in 1883.
That stands to reason, Mr. Schachter.
Right, so what can you tell the court about how you adjusted for that happenstance that there's no record prior to 1884 for Red Rock? And if you look for White Sand, let's go down their column.
Yes,
They don't show up until 1929 in Canada's records.
yes.
And so let's go over to tab 10, because I think tab 10 is how you dealt with that problem. And perhaps you can explain what your numbers are and how you arrived at it. So would it be easier just to focus on one band, say Red Rock or White Sand?
Sure, we could focus on White Sand if you wish.
Sure. So White Sand is column D.
Yes,
Yeah, at tab 10. This is a chart that's in your report, yes?
yes.
Table 3. So what did you do I see your table goes all the way back to 1850.
Yes,
And this is at a time when we know that Robinson thought there were 1,240 people.
yes,
You've got a figure of 170 for White Sand and other population figures for others. So perhaps you can tell me how you arrived at the population in 1850 at 1961.
it's based, my calculations here, the numbers in this table are based on a fact about band populations. And it's a fascinating fact. And that is that band populations tend to have a finite population, which means there's not much growth in band populations over time. When the world only had band populations, it's estimated by demographers that the rate of human growth, the rate of the population of the entire Earth only increased at a rate of about 0.4% over, I can't remember what the period of time was, but it indicates that there's stability and that there's very little growth. We know that too by the evidence in Southern Ontario. When Southern Ontario was being developed,
Slow down just a bit.
when Southern Ontario was being developed, the newcomers population increased dramatically. But the Anishinaabe population, the indigenous population, because more than Anishinaabe in Southern Ontario, the indigenous population there remained constant at 9,000 people for a century. So based on that knowledge that band populations are finite, which is an agreement in anthropology, it seemed to me that if I wanted to know what the population was in 1850, it would be good to take the first known data that I possessed and retrodict it back. Because if there's not going to be much change, then what should happen, when the first number appears, let's say it's in 1929, then that should, if there's not going to be any growth, that should be the same in 1850. In fact, Mr. Schachter, the time when the populations begin to increase for the Lake Nipigon bands and the people on the shore of Lake Superior as well, the Lake Superior Anishinaabe, their populations begin to increase in the 1970s. This is a little bit later than other band populations that are closer to centers of development. What happened was that after the Second World War in 1946, services, medical services began to be extended to First Nations people. They were extended not in the same, at the same rate for all First Nations, but when they were extended, when the modern medical services were extended to the Indigenous peoples of Canada, their population started to increase, which is to say, it became more like the population of Canada as a whole. So what I did is I took the base number, and wherever there was a gap, I took the number below and just retrodicted it back to the next number. Take that number.
What's the word
retrodict it.
you're using?
Retrodict.
Can you, I was going to ask you, can you just explain what retrodict means?
Predicting backwards in time.
Okay.
I should.
So I see for White Sand, the first time they show up in 1929, you retrodicted back to 170. And if you look at Red Rock, that's column G. The first time they showed up was 1884, and you've retrodicted back for 153 people for them as well.
Yes, that's correct. Yes,
Now, you did this and you made some adjustments for some bands coming out of the population of other bands as well?
yes, yes, I did. There was, when the treaty was made in 1850, not much knowledge, according to people on the ground, that would be Anderson in particular. There was not much knowledge about how many people lived in the ceded territory. Now, I know the Commissioner Robinson, believed that he had a pretty accurate number from the Hudson's Bay Company, but others were far more skeptical, that is to say, people who had more firsthand knowledge of it, of the population. You asked the question again?
Well, all right, so there was a skepticism about the population, and you were going to explain about trading post bans?
Oh, yes, thank you. Well, since little was known, there was a hypothetical band. It was called the Nepegon band. And that band had hundreds of people in it, but that band was really an amalgam of other bands. It was an amalgam of bands who came together for a specific economic purpose. And that purpose was to engage with fur traders. So it's a temporary unit that is formed for the purpose of, for commercial purpose. But otherwise, the members of those bands are separate. And in fact, their band identities are always separate. They just merge them temporarily in a trading post band. The Nepegon band was a trading post band. When it was finally discovered that the Nepegon band had members of other bands in it, including the members of the White Sand band in it, then they were broken out. And that's when we see the beginning of the populations in White Sand, say. Also, when they appear in, when White Sand's population appears, let us say, or Red Rock's population appears, if they're counted in the Nepegon band, then what happens is the population of the Nepegon band decreases, because the Nepegon band was never really a band. It was a trading post band, which is a different social structure. And by the way, I'm not the only scholar who has said that about the Nepegon band. As far as I know, all scholars who have investigated the Nepegon band have come to the same conclusion, that it's not a band per se, not like the White Sand band or the Red Rock band or any other band. It is a trading post band. And that's why we see the numbers displayed the way they are in Canada's chart, because once the Red Rock band is recognized as a separate band, then of course, as I said before, the population of the Nepegon band will go down and Red Rock will appear. And
Yeah.
Can I
and-
just ask, is this term you use, a trading band? Is that your word for what was going on, or is that a known?
it's a term of
Word.
art in the discipline, Your Honor.
I think it's a
Okay.
trading post ban.
Trading post band, yes.
Got it.
Now, Canada's data over at tab 9 treats AZA, also known as Lake Nipigon Band. And that's the kind of, I don't want to call, AZA as well existed in 1850. There's no doubt about that.
That's correct.
But that's where the error is in terms of people from other band being lumped into the Nipigon band.
Yes,
And that's why we see and I think to your point, we see the AZA numbers go down as numbers are picked up by other First Nations.
that's correct, Mr. Schachter, yes.
So at tab 10, at the end of the day after your analysis, you come up with a global figure of 1,961 people, not 1,240 people as being in existence in the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory in 1850.
That's correct.
And can you give us a sense as to whether you did any cross checks or whether there's any, if you checked on the reliability of that estimate?
Yes, I did. Dr. Bignami, who's a demographer, also did an estimate of the populations. And my total of 1,961 is within the range of variation that she established back in 1850 for the entire population as well. So my data and her data coincide, and we each approached it from a different point of view. I'm not a demographer. I don't use the same tools as the demographer. I have other tools at my disposal, knowing that the population is finite. And so
So let's go to tab 11 of the compendium. Now, tab 11 of the compendium, that's Dr. Bignami's work.
yes, that's correct.
And I see that her population estimates, depending on the growth rate, are anywhere from 1829 to 2753.
Yes,
And she adjusted for discriminatory provisions of the Indian Act.
that's my understanding. Yes.
You did not.
No, I was instructed not to.
Okay. So your estimate of at tab 10 of 1,961 people in 1850 and the numbers that follow. Let's just stick with 1850. Your figure of 1961, you say, comes in the range of 1829 to 2753
Yes,
from Bignami.
yes, that's correct. It's in the range there, the numeric range.
Okay. And you've also tabulated them each year and in tab 10. And can you give the court a sense of how you feel about the accuracy of those numbers? Because they are quite different than 1240.
Oh, I feel really good about the numbers. And the reason is when scholars from two different disciplines come to the same conclusion, I think it makes both of us feel pretty good that we're providing really good, solid information, in this case to the court.
Dr. Dribbin, I don't have any more questions for you, but the court might, and I believe Mr. Rankin for Ontario and perhaps Canada might have some questions for you as well.
Thank you very much. I have no questions, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Could I have a minute to catch up, please?
Your Honor, could I
Yes.
take a break for a minute, please? Thank you. very
Everyone
much.
else got one, and I think you didn't.
Thank you very
We're
much.
just going to take a 10-minute break. Thank you. I'm going to stay put. Oh,
And actually, for the
Mr.
record,
Cover.
Your Honor, I have no questions of Dr. Driven. Thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Mr. Cover, I'm very sorry about that. That handing up of the compendium totally focused me.
Thank you, Your Honor. So good afternoon, Dr. Dribbin.
Good afternoon, Mr. Rankin.
Yes, we met this morning. I'm David Rankin. I represent Ontario in this matter. Now, Your Honor, just a couple of housekeeping points. We have circulated a compendium to use for purposes of this cross-examination. We have left a version for you, Dr. Dribbin, on your desk. It's
Thank you.
labeled Compendium of His Majesty the King and Right of Ontario, cross-examination of Dr. Paul Dribbin. And you have a copy of that?
I do thank you.
And Your Honor, I'm just noticing that the date on our compendium says March 1st, 2023, which is of course not today. So we might adjust that as well. And Your Honor, I'm going to ask to mark this compendium as the next lettered exhibit, which I believe is Exhibit K. And we might call it something like Compendium for Cross-Examination of Dr. Dribbin.
Right. And should I ask Mr. Schachter if his exhibit is changing to a numbered?
Well,
Exhibit.
because it contains excerpts of
Okay.
Other experts who haven't testified and whose reports are not in evidence yet. I don't
Okay.
know that it should be a numbered exhibit just yet. Could be later once they testify. I think it's
All right.
the appropriate way of doing it.
Thank you. Sorry. Mr. Rankin, please go
No,
ahead.
thank you, Your Honor. And just in terms of this Exhibit K, as I go through it, I will indicate where in the records the various documents can be found. And just to forecast it, there is one document which we will have to mark as a numbered exhibit, but it's just to correct an issue with the Joint Book of Documents. It's an issue where only the first page was included, but the whole document should have been included. But we'll come to that.
Thank you.
Now, Dr. Dribbin, as I go through this, I'm going to refer to this compendium as Exhibit K from time to time, just for the transcript. But you'll know what I'm talking about. It's this compendium document.
Thank you.
So staying on the theme of housekeeping, Dr. Dribbin, we'd asked our friend Mr. Schachter last week to ask you to review a short list of materials in advance of your cross-examination today. So let me just confirm, did you have a chance to review the materials?
Yes, I received the list and reviewed the materials. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Drippin. And the materials included the transcripts from your testimony at the first stage of this proceeding, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, and you had a chance to review those transcripts.
I had a chance to look at them, yes.
Thank you. And as I go through my questions, I'm going to occasionally refer to the first stage of this proceeding, and I'm going to refer to it as stage one. Is that okay?
Sure.
All right, so let's dive in, Dr. Dribbin. I'm going to start with an inventory of your various reports for the court, okay? And most of my questions today are going to deal with the report that was described earlier today as the happiness report.
Yes, sir.
And that would be your report dated January 30th, 2022, entitled Happiness, How the Parties to the Robinson Superior Treaty 1850 Understood the Share of the Net Crown Resource Revenues of the Lake Superior Anishinaabe were entitled to receive under the auspices of the augmentation clause when the treaty was made. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And that's been marked as Exhibit 14, correct? And for simplicity, Dr. Dribbin, I'm going to refer to Exhibit 14 as your happiness report. And you'll
Thank
know
you.
what I'm
That,
talking
that
about.
will make it easier for me.
Thank you. And you have a copy of your happiness report with you?
I do.
Now, as I'm defining things, Dr. Dribbin, in the title to your happiness report, you refer to the augmentation clause in quotation marks, correct?
Yes,
And the augmentation clause you're referring to is the provision in the Robinson treaties which provides for increases to the annuity, correct?
that's correct.
So I'm going to call that the augmentation clause, okay?
Sure.
And I only say that because sometimes it's referred to as the escalator clause or something else. I'll refer to it as the augmentation clause, and you'll know what I'm talking about.
And I will refer to it in the same way. I've heard the escalator clause and other descriptions as well.
Thank you, Dr. Dribbin. So moving on, I may ask questions about your report dated January 23rd, 2022, entitled An Anthropological Report on the Antiquity and Demography of the Red Rock and White Sand Bands and Related Matters, okay?
Yes,
And that was marked as exhibit number 15. And for simplicity, Dr. Dribbin, I'll refer to that as your demography report, okay?
sure.
And you have a copy of your demography report with you?
I do.
Now, Dr. Dribbin, I understand that you also authored a report for stage one of these proceedings, dated November 2015, titled Such Sum as Her Majesty May Be Graciously Pleased to Order, an Anthropological Report on the Annuity Payable under the Terms of the Robinson Superior Treaty. Is that right?
That's correct.
And I'm going to refer to this as your stage one report, okay?
That works. Yes. Thank you.
Now, finally, Dr. Dribbin, you authored a reply report dated August 15th, 2017, titled Such Sum as Her Majesty May Be Graciously Pleased to Order, a reply report. Is that right?
That one, I can't quite remember, to tell you the truth here.
So Dr. Dribbin, do you remember reading a report of a Mr. Chartrand?
Oh, yes, yes, okay.
And do you remember preparing a reply report to that report by Mr. Chartrand?
Yes, I do.
And I'm going to refer to that report, by which I mean your report, as the stage 1 reply report, okay?
Fine.
Now, Dr. Driven, I believe I've now indicated all 4 of the reports that you've prepared for these proceedings.
Yes.
Now, Dr. Driven, I want to turn into the relationship between your happiness report and your stage 1 report, okay? And you'd agree with me, Dr. Driven, that there is overlap between your happiness report and your stage 1 report, correct?
Yes, there's overlap. There's historical documents are mentioned, concepts are mentioned in both reports. So yes, there is overlap.
Thank you. And I just want to be a bit more precise about that as well. So, Dr. Driven, if you could turn to tab 1 of Exhibit K.
I'm there, sir.
Now, Dr. Driven, do you recognize this as page 12 from your happiness report?
Yes, I do.
Now, I'm going to read to you the second paragraph on page 12. What the lawyers asked me was, A, to explain what the Anishinaabe considered to be the share of the net crown resource revenues they were entitled to receive. B, to identify what the meeting of the minds was with colonial officials with respect to the share the Anishinaabe were promised. And C, to describe how the understanding and perspective of the parties to the treaty differed. Do you see that?
I do.
No, Dr. Driven, I understand those were the instructions from the lawyers and those are the questions you answered for your report.
Well, as I said this morning, it's not, I didn't exactly answer these questions. When you read through the report, you will see that and I'll explain, I tried to answer these questions in a way in which I could use my expertise to best assist the court in its deliberations here. So I didn't answer these 3 questions specifically as I did in the demography report. That's more of a question and answer one. This is different.
Thank you, Dr. Driven. Let me put it to you this way. There wasn't a 4th question you were asked to address, for example.
No.
So, Dr. Driven, I want to go through the same process for your stage 1 report. So if we can turn to tab 2 of Exhibit K. And do you recognize this as page 12 from your stage 1 report?
Yes, I do.
And first, you remember writing your stage 1 report, correct?
I do.
Now, we see here on page 12 a statement. It says, more specifically, I was asked to answer the following questions. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
So these were the questions you were asked to address for your stage 1 report.
Yes.
So Dr. Driven, if we can turn over the page to page 13 of your stage 1 report, do you see the paragraph numbered 3B, B as in Bob?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to read that to you. 3B, how did the chiefs and principal men who endorsed the Robinson treaties understand the phrase, such further sum as Her Majesty may be graciously pleased to order with respect to how, when, and by how much the annuity would be increased? Do you see that?
I do.
And there's a quotation in that paragraph, such further sum as Her Majesty may be graciously pleased to order. Do you see that?
I do.
In that quotation, that's referring to the augmentation clause, correct?
The augmentation clause in the treaty, that's correct.
So you were addressing how, when, and by how much the annuity would be increased, correct?
Well, that was the question that was asked and I tried to answer it as best I could.
But you believe you answered that question.
In a manner of speaking, as I said before, I tried to answer the questions that were asked of me in a way that I could use what I have, my skills, to assist the court. So the questions not be answered specifically, but I thought in the context of the entire report that these questions would be answered in a proper way.
So how, when, and how much, that relates to the share
Yes,
that the Anishinaabe were entitled to receive,
yes,
correct?
yes,
So your stage 1 report addresses the Anishinaabe perspective on sharing, correct?
the stage 1 report, the focus of the stage 1 report is on how the Anishinaabe understood their annuity, which was decided in the last proceeding.
But to answer this question 3B that I read out, you
Yes.
addressed the Anishinaabe perspective on sharing, correct?
If I recall correctly in there, I believe I did. And I believe I said that sharing was, fundamental to Anishinaabe culture.
Okay, and your happiness report, that also addresses the Anishinaabe perspective on sharing, correct?
Yes, it does. In a more fulsome way, I believe.
So both reports address the Anishinaabe perspective on sharing.
Well, the first report, far less so than the second report, as I recall, because the focus of the two reports were different, and it might not be that I answered this question very well in the stage 1 report.
So Dr.
Which
Driven,
is to say, I'm sorry, which is to say, I was asked this question. Whether I answered it properly is up to others to decide.
so Dr. Driven, I've gone through the process of looking at the references that you cited in your stage 1 report. And I've looked at the list of references in your happiness report.
Yes,
And I would put to you that there is considerable overlap between the references cited in the 2 reports. Would you agree with that?
oh, I do agree with that. And the reason for that is that the historical documents that I used in this first stage and in this stage of the proceedings speak to the same issues. Also, there's the ethnographic information, and that information as well would use the same resources, the same sources. Hallowell, Rogers, but speaking of anthropologists, Cleland, and so on.
So in terms of primary sources, I didn't identify any additional primary sources that you considered for your happiness report compared to your stage 1 report. Would you agree with that?
What do you mean by a primary source?
Well, Dr. Driven, perhaps I could turn you into tab 3 of Exhibit K. And do you see under documents? And let me back up. This is page 17 of your happiness report, correct?
Yes,
And do you see under documents at the very last line where it says, while I discuss only some?
yes,
So I'm going to read this to you. While I discuss only some of the documents that I reviewed to prepare this report, all the materials I refer to in the text are identified in the references cited section of the report. These include primary and secondary sources. Do
yes,
you see that?
yes,
So you used the word primary sources here?
yes, I did.
Okay, so what did you mean by primary sources?
Documents, the documents from the historical record as opposed to published articles. These would be original sources, original source documents. Those would be my primary sources. And then my other sources would be ethnographic sources. They would be articles. materials such as that, ethnographies, materials such as that, yes.
Okay, so Dr. Driven, using your definition of primary sources, would you agree with me that your happiness report doesn't cite any additional primary sources not cited in your stage 1 report?
I couldn't say without looking at every single source, but I think that by and large, you're correct. I used the same sources in both reports.
So Dr. Driven, on the same page that we have here, which is page 18 of your happiness report, do you see the paragraph starting additionally to better inform my understanding?
Yes, I do.
I'm going to read that. Additionally, to better inform my understanding, I have relied on my own ethnographic experience and on the publications and field notes of other ethnologists who have undertaken field work among the Anishinaabe,
Yes,
which one expert in the field has described as, quote, essential for the proper interpretation of the observations and information left by others, end quote. Do you see that?
yes, I do.
And in this paragraph, you reference field notes and other publications, right?
Yes,
And the field notes would be referred to in your references cited section, correct?
field notes would be those that were written up as monographs. That's what I had in mind there.
I see. And do you know whether in your happiness report, you cite additional field notes not referenced in your stage 1 report?
I can't recall.
So Dr. Driven, I'd like to turn into the substance of your happiness report. And specifically, I want to explore further the Crown Anishinaabe kinship relationship concept, okay?
Sure.
So Dr. Driven, if we can turn to tab 4, please, of Exhibit K.
Yes,
And do you recognize this as page 8 of your happiness report?
yes, I do.
And do you see in the middle of the page a paragraph that's numbered number 1?
Yes, I do.
And just before that, it says, to be more specific, it is my opinion, colon. And then there's paragraph 1 that the Anishinaabe believe. Do you see that?
I see that.
So I'm going to read that to you together where we include it is my opinion and the numbered paragraph, okay?
Okay.
So it is my opinion that the Anishinaabe believed the Crown would calculate the collective annuity they would receive under the auspices of the augmentation clause on the basis of social considerations rather than on the basis of pecuniary ones. And that these social considerations would be based on what the Anishinaabe understood to be their kinship in parentheses parent-child and parentheses relationship with the Crown. And that prevailing social considerations would be used to determine the share of the quote, net Crown resource revenues, end quote, the Anishinaabe were entitled to receive. Do you see that?
I do.
Okay, so it's in the context of this summary of your opinion that I want to ask about the kinship parent-child relationship that you reference, okay?
Sure.
So Dr. Driven, if I understand your evidence, you say that the parent-child kinship relationship is reflected in the way that the Anishinaabe referred to the Governor General as my father, correct?
Yes, that's correct. The terms of address, the kin terms of address that they use are indicators of the content of the relationship, of the scope and nature of the relationship. You refer to somebody as father or great father, that brings to mind something in an Anishinabe's mind or in anybody's mind who uses terms, kin terms.
Now, Dr. Driven, you deal with this further at page 35 of your happiness report. So if you could turn over the page, same tab. Do you recognize this as page 35 of your happiness report?
I do.
Okay, do you see around the middle of the page, right after footnote 78, where it says for Anishinaabe, the word nos or my father? Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
So it says, For Anishinaabe, the word nos, or in quotes, my father, served notice that the relationship between them and the newcomers was different than the connection between brothers.
Yes,
And you go on, instead of a symmetrical relationship, the new term of address implied an asymmetrical relationship. It also was a relationship in which the expectations of the First Nations and their colonial fathers about the roles that fathers were expected to play were different. You see that?
yes,
So brotherhood implies a symmetrical relationship, correct?
among Anishinaabe, it does. Brothers are equal. Sometimes there's some difference between older, middle, and younger brother, but by and large, brothers are considered equal actors among the Anishinaabe.
Okay, and among the Anishinaabe, fatherhood implied an asymmetrical relationship. Is that what
By
you're saying?
necessity, because just because an infant has no power to really accomplish anything and requires an adult supervision. So there is an asymmetrical relationship built in from the very beginning.
Now, when we talk about the asymmetrical fatherhood relationship here, that's between the First Nations and the Crown, correct?
Yes,
And the Anishinaabe would have perceived of their relationship with the Crown as different from their relationship with the newcomers, correct?
which newcomers?
So I'm using the word newcomers as a phrase that you use in your happiness report as well,
Yes,
to mean generally the settlers.
yes. Well, I don't think that they're going to refer that, as far as I know, Anishinaabe did not refer to all of the newcomers as father, but representatives of the Crown were referred to as father. In this case, the Governor General, Vidal and Anderson, and so on, with Robinson as well.
So the newcomers as a group would have been perceived of as separate from the representatives of the Crown, correct?
Yes, yes. For instance, the fur traders were not the Crown, and they would clearly distinguish between fur traders and representatives of the Crown.
Okay, so
Sorry, say that again. Traders were not the Crown. They were representatives of the Crown.
No, I'm
sorry.
saying, Your Honor, that the Anishinaabe would distinguish between persons such as fur traders
Okay.
who were not representing the Crown and officials such as Treaty Commissioner Robinson and so on, who were representatives of the Crown.
Thank you.
So, Dr. Dribbin, I'd like to take you to the petition to Lord Elgin that we spoke about this morning from 1852. And we have that in the compendium at tab 5.
Yes,
And what you see here at tab 5, this is the same version of the petition that my friend, Mr. Schachter, took you to earlier today, correct?
I'm familiar with this petition, yes.
Now, Her Honor asked this morning about a part of this petition where Alan MacDonnell was being referred to as one of the Crown's white children. Do you remember that exchange?
I do.
And I believe you said that white children here was being used as a figure of speech. Is that right?
Yes, to differentiate between white people and Anishinaabe.
Okay, so Dr. Dribbin, can we please turn to page 3 of this petition? And I will indicate for the court that we've added page numbers to the top right-hand corner.
Yes,
So do you see, Dr. Dribbin, the second instance of the word father, comma, and it says you exhort us?
I do see that. Yes, sir.
So you see that it says, Father, you exhort us to cultivate the earth as your white children do.
Yes, I do.
So then if we turn over the next page to page 4, do you see the second instance of father?
Yes, I do.
And it says, Father, do not disdain these words of your red children. The great being heard them from the bottoms of our afflicted hearts. We want your white children to know them too. They will see if they are just, and we think our brothers praying like ourselves will have compassion for us in their hearts. And they will want our Father to do us justice. And this thought will do good to our heart. Do you see that?
I do.
Now, in the middle of that passage I just read to you, you see where it says, we want your white children to know them too.
Yes,
And in that sentence, your refers to Lord Elgin, correct?
that's correct.
And white children refers to the newcomers.
Yes, it does.
And you see where it says, our brothers praying like ourselves will have compassion for us in their hearts.
Yes,
In that sentence, our refers to the Lake Superior and Anishinaabe,
yes,
and brothers refers to the newcomers.
I believe so, yes.
Can I just find that?
Yes. Your Honor, brothers starts after the colon on the fourth line down.
Right, and you say the question, so it's our brothers praying like themselves?
Correct.
And you say our is a self-referential.
To the Lake Superior and Anishinaabe.
Got it.
So Dr. Dribbin, I'm going to put it to you that this shows that the Anishinaabe in the mid-19th century conceived of their relationship with the newcomers as one of brotherhood.
No, I don't agree with that.
Would you agree that the Anishinaabe understood that the crown was in a parent-child kinship relationship with the newcomers?
No, I don't see that from these statements either.
And you don't see that because you see the reference to white children as being a figure of speech.
It refers, it's a generic term that refers to the newcomers, the white newcomers. That's how I see that term, sir.
So when you see the Anishinaabe referring to themselves as children, you see that that reflects their understanding of a parent-child kinship relationship with the crown.
Yes,
But when you see the Anishinaabe referring to the white as newcomers as being the white children, you do not see that as being part of the Anishinaabe understanding that the newcomers are also in a parent-child kinship relationship with the crown.
not of the same sort of relationship, because the way the Anishinaabe conceive of the relationship between parent and child is particular to the Anishinaabe. So the relationship between the newcomers and the Governor General would not be based on Anishinaabe principles, it would be based on the principles of the newcomer society. So the two are different. Even though they're both referred to as children, the relationship between the two would be based on different principles.
So you're saying, sir, that the Anishinaabe would not have understood that the crown had parent-child responsibilities to the newcomers?
Not in the same sense that the crown, their perception was that they wouldn't see the crown as having the same relationship with the newcomers as they would the crown having a relationship with themselves, because the relationship between the crown and the newcomers was based on European principles. It was not based on Anishinaabe principles, and they would understand that because they're all of that system. Which is to say, the Europeans are all of that system, so it would be reasonable to believe that they would operate according to the principles that govern that relationship among white people. And that relationship is different. We know that in my report, I described that relationship. It is a different relationship.
Could I just jump in here? The question Mr. Rankin asked was about the Anishinaabe understanding, and your answer was, well, the relationship between the crown and the newcomers would have been based on European understandings.
Yes,
But I thought the question was what the Anishinaabe would have perceived as of that relationship. Do I have that wrong, Mr. Rankin?
That's exactly my question.
I think your answer, Dr. Dribbin, was And maybe do answer it. You say they wouldn't see the Crown as having the same relationship as the newcomers. Because there was, whatever relationship existed between the Crown and the newcomers would have been based on European principles. But shall I take from your answer that you're saying that would have been the Anishinaabe perspective
The initial, yes,
of that relationship?
maybe I could explain it this way, Your Honor. They understood, the Anishinaabe understood that they had a particular relationship with the Crown based on European principles. Pardon me, based on Anishinaabe principles.
Okay.
And when they looked at the relationship between the newcomers and the Crown, they would not see the same relationship as the relationship between Anishinaabe and the Crown. Those two would be different. They would see them as different.
So they would see them as different. And do I understand your evidence, sir, that the Anishinaabe would not have seen the relationship between the newcomers and the Crown in fictive kinship terms?
Well, I don't think they would have seen it in fictive kinship terms, because the point about fictive kinship is that you employ it when you want to establish a relationship and there is no biological or affinal, meaning a marriage relationship. And that's how the Anishinaabe are employing it. And I don't see the same relationship with the newcomers and the Crown, and I don't think the Anishinaabe did either.
So I guess, sir, you're saying that in this petition and other documents like it, the Anishinaabe are using children in two different ways. One to refer to the fictive kinship relationship between themselves and the Crown, and one as a figure of speech when it comes to the newcomers. Is that what you're saying?
I think so, yes. That's what I'm saying. Yes, sir.
All right. I'd like to turn to tab 6 of Exhibit K, please. And this is page 8 of your happiness report, correct?
Yes, it is.
And you'll see that we've highlighted numbered paragraph 3, correct?
Yes.
And again, just to read this grammatically, we always have to start with, "It is my opinion" at the top and then read into the paragraph, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, so I'm going to read this to you like that. "It is my opinion that the Anishinaabe anticipated the Crown would consider their collective wants and needs to be of the utmost importance in calculating their share of the net Crown resource revenues, monitor their wants and needs on a regular basis, spare no effort to spend the share to satisfy those wants and needs, and provide the Anishinaabe with a share that would be generous but not overwhelm the Crown." You see that?
I do.
Now, I want to zero in on the words "overwhelm the Crown."
Yes.
"Overwhelm the Crown," those were your words,
Yes, they are.
and you chose those words carefully.
I did.
What do you mean by overwhelm?
I meant that in any single instance where the collective annuity would be awarded, they would not want, let me say it this way. The Anishinaabe believed that the annuity, the augmented annuity would occur on a regular and recurrent basis. If it occurred on a regular and recurrent basis, they didn't want any individual payment, let us say, to overwhelm the Crown. That's what I meant by that. Not all of the payments, that if they didn't pay for 100 years, I didn't mean that. That's not what they had in mind. They meant, I meant it any individual payment at that time.
So you meant any individual payment, and you're basing that on the kinship relationship, right?
Yes, because the child, in this case, the Anishinaabe, would not want to do something that would harm the Crown in one instance. But on the other hand, if the Crown was not responding for long periods of time, then the game changes. because, excuse me, to go on, because then what changes is that you begin to wonder whether the authenticity of the parent-child relationship is actually authentic.
So if the amount would have overwhelmed the Crown, as you define it,
Yes,
are you saying that this would have been inconsistent with the kinship relationship as the Anishinaabe understood it in 1850?
for an individual, for any, let's say that they agreed to do this every 2 years through consultation or 3 years. Yes, I think in that case, they would be concerned that during that period of time, a 2-year period of time, they wouldn't want to overwhelm the Crown in that way. But like I said, if it goes on longer than that, then it's a different, the situation is different, because the Crown is then demonstrating that they are not acting as their fathers should act, as Anishinaabe fathers would act, which would be in the best interest of their children.
And in that circumstance, then it would be okay to overwhelm the Crown. Is that what you're saying?
Today,
Sure.
we are here.
And that opinion that you just gave, that's based on your understanding of the parent-child kinship relationship.
Yes, so the way the Anishinaabe conceive of it, in any particular time, you don't want to overwhelm your parent. But if your parent is non-responsive, like I said, that's different. That's different, because then the parent's not really acting as the parent. And we know that the Anishinaabe can use the term father in other contexts too, where they use it with derision.
Okay. So Dr. Driven, I want to move into your opinions on how sharing would work under the augmentation clause, okay?
Sure.
So for that, if you would please turn to tab 7 of Exhibit K. So you recognize this again to be page 8 of your happiness report?
Yes, sir.
And again, this is where you summarize your opinions, correct?
That's correct, sir.
Okay, so I'm going to read paragraph number 2 in the same way as before, where it starts, "It is my opinion.
Yes.
It is my opinion that over time, the Anishinaabe expected their descendants to become equal partners with the Crown in calculating and administering the share of the quote, net Crown resource revenues, end quote, each Robinson Superior band would receive, and that in the future, the Anishinaabe would become responsible for administering the share of the quote, net Crown resource revenues, end quote, themselves." See that?
I do.
Okay, and then this opinion, Dr. Driven, you explain further on page 21 of your happiness report, which is the next page over in the tab. And do you see, Dr. Driven, where there is, I'd say, just less than halfway down the page, a paragraph that starts, "It also is my opinion that."
I see that.
So you say, "It is also my opinion that the Anishinaabe believe their colonial fathers, like their own fathers, would calculate and administer the share generated for their benefit via the quote, augmentation clause, end quote, until they could manage their own affairs. In the meantime, but not forever, the Anishinaabe were content to permit the Crown, to permit Crown officials to calculate and administer the annuity." Do you see that?
I do.
So, Dr. Driven, you seem to be saying here that the Crown was to calculate and administer the annuity for a limited period of time, not forever, but eventually this would shift to the Anishinaabe.
Yes,
have that
as
right?
yes, as the Anishinaabe became capable of doing this on their own, it's just a reflection of this, the parent-child relationship in general among Anishinaabe. As the child learns and engages with the environment, let's say hunting, once you learn how to hunt, what happens is you're going to hunt with your dad for maybe till you're about 20 years old. But then once you marry, you're going to be off on your own and you're going to be doing all of this on your own. And that's the analogy I see here. It's part of their lifestyle. It's the way Anishinaabe live, even today where they're foraging for a period of time until the youngster learns how to actually conduct themselves in the bush. They'll need some instruction. But eventually they'll master that instruction because they have excellent teachers and they're apt students, and then they will proceed on their own, and they'll have their own family and so on through generations.
Okay, Dr. Driven. So I have a number of questions about this. So what I'd like to do is to give this a definition so that we are talking about the same thing. So when I gave you on page 8, paragraph 2, and that paragraph from paragraph 21, I take that to be your opinion that you just articulated. And what I'd like to do is define that as the transition theory. Would that be okay?
Certainly.
So if I understand your evidence just now, Dr. Driven, you're saying the transition theory is based on an analogy to the kinship relationship, correct?
It's based on an analogy of how Anishinaabe children become mature and are able to take over the tasks that they need to operate independently of their parents. That's the analogy I'm drawing here.
And if I understand your happiness report, the transition theory relates specifically to the implementation of the augmentation clause, correct?
Here, yes.
And I believe earlier today, Dr. Driven, you testified that the augmentation clause is unique to the Robinson treaties, correct?
To the Robinson Huron and Robinson Superior. I've looked, as I said before, I've looked at many treaties and I've never found another one with an augmentation clause in it.
So the augmentation clause is unique to the Robinson treaties. And the transition theory relates to the augmentation clause. So would you agree with me that the transition theory is unique to the Robinson treaties?
With regard to the augmented annuity, yes, because there is only one, only the Robinson treaties have the augmented annuity.
So, Dr. Driven, you're not aware of any other Anishinaabe treaty, either with the Crown or with the US government, where the parties negotiated for something similar to the transition theory, correct?
Well, it's not a theory. It's the way Anishinaabe mature. It's a fact. It's a fact of their lives. It's not a theory about how Anishinaabe become mature. It's a fact of how they become mature by observing, imitating, and then taking over. So in this case, I'm saying specifically with respect to the augmentation clause, that's how they viewed it. You asked me a question about other treaties. Could you ask the question again, please?
So my question was, you're not aware of any other Anishinaabe treaty, either with the Crown or with the US government, where the parties negotiated for something similar to the transition theory. Is that right?
Well, there would be treaties that I don't know, I'd have to take a look at specific treaties to be able to answer that question, really.
But sitting here today, none come to mind.
No, I think that these treaties are unique.
So Dr. Driven, would you agree with me that the parent-child kinship relationship is not unique to the Robinson Superior Anishinaabe of the mid-19th century?
I would agree with that, certainly.
So other Anishinaabe in the mid-19th century would have seen their relationship with the Crown in similar terms,
I believe so, yes.
and they would have seen the Anishinaabe of the mid-19th century would have seen their relationship with the US government in similar terms?
As a parent-child relationship?
Correct.
Yes,
So staying here in Canada, you're familiar with Treaty 3. You spoke about that earlier today.
yes, I am somewhat familiar with it, yes.
And the Anishinaabe treaty partners to Treaty 3 would have seen their relationship with the Crown in a similar parent-child kinship relationship.
Yes, they'd have used the same terms and yes,
But the transition theory is unique to the Robinson treaties, right?
it's unique. I'm using it not so much unique to the Robinson Superior Treaties, but to the augmentation clause.
I hope you're not, I am sensing that there is a deliberate trying to put words into this witness's mouth. You are the one who said, can I call it the transition theory? It's not a theory developed. My understanding from this witness is he has made observations of the manner that the Anishinaabe conduct themselves and applied it to how they would deal with a provision that everyone in this room, everyone involved in this case knows is a unique treaty provision. So asking about other treaties where this transition theory, which you have been the first to call it, is applied, seems to me to be completely off track of any evidence we have had from this witness. Maybe you can help me. Maybe I've missed something.
Well, Your Honor, in terms of the label, I only did that not to put words in anybody's mouth, just because I wanted a short way of describing the paragraphs I took Dr. Driven to. That was the reason for the short form. So we shouldn't read anything into the choice of the words. Dr. Driven was fine with them. If he wasn't, I would have chosen something else.
Right, but the notion that it's a theory that I thought that your subsequent questions suggested it was a theory he propounded. It was a theory he had, that he'd worked with this theory. Because you kept saying you haven't applied this theory. The application of a theory suggests that there is a worked up theory.
Well, Your Honor, as I read Dr. Driven's report, he is presenting his opinion. He called it a theory. I don't mean theory in any sort of, I don't mean to diminish anything by calling it a theory. You can call it an opinion. So he's given an opinion with respect to this transition between the Crown first administering the annuity, and then that transitions to the Anishinaabe. And the question I was asking fundamentally was whether that is reflected in any other treaties he's familiar with. And I understood the evidence to be no.
Well, the answer was actually, I think, there is no provision like this in any other treaty.
Correct.
So we're not talking about a transition from the Crown administers it until there is a matured relationship. I should stop. I put out there that seems to be confusing to me. Mr. Schachter may have been on his feet. No?
No.
I'm sorry.
I'm. Dr. Driven actually said you called it a theory. I didn't agree that it was a theory, other than for the purposes of having my friend continue on with his questioning. I might object on the basis of there is no other treaty, but that's almost me objecting about relevance. It's my friend's cross-examination. I didn't want to interfere too much. So perhaps I should sit down.
And maybe I've done enough to interrupt you that you might.
No, this is all fine, Your Honor. So subject to anything else on that, I'll move on.
Okay.
So Dr. Driven, what I'd like to do now is, and let me pause and say, are you comfortable with me continuing to call it a transition theory, or would you rather me call it something else, like your transition opinion or
Model.
model? Model it is. I just want to be able to refer
Well,
quickly to something.
I'll tell you, I don't know how to conceptualize it in your terms, but I can tell you what it is. And what it is what I'm making is a statement about the augmented annuity in this treaty, I'm not applying this generally to Anishinaabe and relationships with the Crown with respect to learning other skills such as agriculture or anything else. I'm only saying that this is how it operated from the point of view of the Anishinaabe.
Okay, so what I'd like to do then, Dr. Driven, is talk about some of the evidence that you discussed to support the transition model.
Okay.
So if we can turn to tab 9 of Exhibit K, please. And you'd agree with me that this is pages 52 and 53 of your happiness report?
Yes,
So I'd like to read to you, starting at the bottom of page 52, the paragraph starting, although the timing of their response. Do you see that?
I do.
So although the timing of their response flew in the face of custom, in my view, a more important factor was at play. Since chiefs and headmen were obliged to represent the will of the bands they represented, it is my opinion that the members of the bands who sent representatives to the 1850 Treaty Council already had decided that a mutually beneficial treaty could best be achieved by relying on their kinship relationship with the Great Mother and her colonial fathers before the delegates departed for the Sioux. As Elder Dan Pine, a great grandson of Chief Shinwakans, explained, quote, "The Indians had meetings between the heads of families before the leaders went and passed the treaty. If the idea got a majority, it passed. The decision was made before the leader left," end quote. And so, having been instructed by their constituents to place their faith in the relationship they believed would best secure their future, the Lake Superior Anishinaabe came straight to the point. Do you see that?
I do.
Now, if you could help me to understand that a little bit, Dr. Driven. So you seem to be inferring that the Anishinaabe decided to rely on their kinship relationship based on the timing by which the Anishinaabe responded to Robinson's proposal. Do I have that right?
Could you say that again, please?
So as I understood this paragraph, let me back up. If you go to page 52,
Yes.
you see how it starts, although the timing of their response flew in the face of custom.
Oh, yes. Yes.
So I understood this to be inferring from the timing of the response that the Anishinaabe decided to rely on their kinship relationship with the Crown. Do I have that about right?
Yes, and this is what I'm talking about here is a practice that is documented in the historical record with regards to treaties between the Crown and the United States and the Anishinaabe people. During these proceedings, it's typical to begin with a statement by the commissioner and to say, this is what we intend to do at this treaty conference. And then the Anishinaabe respond with their credentials, or they may list their credentials first and say, I was involved with the United States government. I did this for the government. I did this for the Crown. We were allies in this, and so on. So that is the normal practice in treaties. And then because the commissioner has made a proposal in his initial remarks, the delegates take a break and they ask for some time to talk it over. Sometimes the talk is just among themselves, but sometimes, depending on the treaty, it's with outside advisors as well. And when they have, after they have that conversation, then they go back to the council with a collective decision. But here I'm saying that was different. That's the normal practice. But this didn't take place here. Here, they had decided, as I see it, to capitalize, as I say, on their kinship with the Crown. They were depending on the Crown to act as their fathers. And they said, yes, that is our best way forward. That's the best way we can see. And they had instructed their principal men and chiefs to go to the treaty council to make that known. So when instead of taking a break, Podeshat said, we're ready right now. We trust you. We believe you. You are our father. We know that you'll treat us as a father treats an Anishinaabe child. We know that you'll have our best interests at heart. So we don't need time to think about it. We already know why we came here. And so let's proceed. They were ready to sign right there, then and there, or to touch the pen.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Driven. So I want to talk about Podeshat's statement, which you just alluded to.
Yes,
So let me do that by going to page 53. Right after where I stopped reading, there's the paragraph which starts Podeshat's final comment. You see that?
I do.
So you say Podeshat's final comment at the Treaty Council, which he made on the morning of the following day, Saturday, September 7th, indicate as much. And let me just pause there for a second. So indicate as much, that is the decision of the Anishinaabe to rely on the kinship relationship, right?
Yes,
Okay, so then you go on, later that day, the treaty commissioner wrote in his diary that after Podeshat had, quote, touched the pen, end quote, to the handwritten treaty, the Ogama Gijido, and let me just pause there. Ogama Gijido, that means chief speaker, correct?
yes. It's
And
a chief speaker. Sometimes in treaty councils or in other councils, there will be a speaker that speaks for the whole and represents the will of the whole.
Okay, and in this context, the Ogama Gijido is Podeshat, correct?
That's correct.
So then, so it's Podeshat who made the statement, and I quote, Podeshat said the amount he was to receive made no difference with him. He was ready to obey the wishes of his queen now, as he had always been. You see
Yes.
that? And that is a quotation from William Robinson's diary, correct?
That's correct.
So Dr. Driven, you then go on and you write in the next paragraph, from an Anishinaabe point of view, the message could not have been clearer. And just pausing there, the message could not have been clearer from Podeshat's statement. Is that what you're saying?
From Podeshat's statement about that the Lake Superior Anishinaabe were ready to obey the wishes of the crown. Yes, they were ready.
And you go on, when it came to administering, when it came to matters such as calculating and administering the collective annuity, they would receive under the terms of the quote augmentation clause, end quote. The Lake Superior Anishinaabe would rely on their colonial fathers to guide them until they were ready to become equal partners in the process and eventually administer the share themselves, right?
Yes, that's correct.
So I'd like to zero in on that last clause where you say, and eventually administer the share themselves, right?
Yes,
And those were your words?
yes.
And that's not something that Podeshat said, at least not in those terms, correct?
No, Podeshat is speaking in literary terms here, as is often the case among Anishinaabe, because it's an oral culture and words are very important to them.
But your grounding for that comment is that statement, the amount will make no difference to Podeshat, correct?
Yes, correct. But by the way, so I should also add that the Mishipicoten Anishinaabe also said, you know, we have full faith in the crown and we are ready to cede a territory to our great mother.
Okay, and we established that this quotation from Podeshat, that's as reflected in William Robinson's diary.
Yes,
And Dr. Driven, you'll remember that William Robinson's diary was among the documents we asked you to take a look at in advance of the cross-examination.
I
today.
do. Yes,
And you had a chance to look at the William B. Robinson's diary.
I did.
And you'd agree with me that the words eventually administer the share themselves or anything like that don't appear in William Robinson's diary, correct?
No, that's my opinion.
And I also couldn't find words like eventually administer the share themselves or anything like it in any of the secondary sources. And I take it you haven't either?
No, that's my opinion.
So, Dr. Driven, I want to come back to the transition model more generally.
Excuse me, can we just call it a transition?
Sure. That's okay.
It's not really a model. It's a description of the way Anishinaabe children mature.
That's fine, Dr. Driven. Like I said, I'm only doing that in order so that we know what we're talking about. So we're not talking past each other.
Perhaps just transition will work.
Transition is fine.
Okay.
And I'm going to put it to you, Dr. Driven, that you haven't published about this transition in reference to the Robinson Treaties in any peer-reviewed journals, have you?
No, I haven't.
And you developed your opinion on the transition specifically for this case, correct?
I did, yes.
And you don't know of any other scholars who have published about the transition as regarding the Robinson treaties in any peer-reviewed journals or books, correct?
Not that I'm aware of.
And I didn't see anywhere in your stage 1 report or your stage 1 reply report where you discussed this transition either. Is that right?
That's correct.
So perhaps, Dr. Driven, you can tell me approximately when you formed your opinion about the transition in reference to the Robinson treaties. When did you form that opinion?
During the course of my research to prepare the happiness report, because realizing that kinship was fundamental to the relationship between the two of them, I had to take a deep dive into that relationship in order to make a proper analysis.
Okay. So, Dr. Driven, what I'd like to do now is,
Take a look at your watch.
yes, it's 4:45, Your Honor, and I'm happy to break whenever is convenient for the
Very
court.
Okay. Okay, let's do that. We'll take a break for the day. I don't know that there is much dependence on you budgeting or letting people know your time, but possibly for travel arrangements. If you have a sense of how long you're going to take, that would be helpful.
So, Your Honor, I'm making good progress. I would say probably 2 hours or so at the
Okay.
outside. So I think we'll finish in the morning.
Very good. Okay.
Right.
And Canada? Very good. All right. Thank you all. So got that, those estimates. Tomorrow at 10?
Oh yay, oh yay, oh yay, the citizens are not included, as long as we can.
Dr. Driven, you're under oath, so you can't talk to anybody.
I understand that.
We're going to give you